يلا شو الفوكس على الفوكس. هنا جو قضيتين بين صبح المطلق.
This is Ain al-Hilwi, the Palestinian refugee camp where my family is from. My friends in Europe have never understood why I'd spend my holidays in a place like this. But to me, going to Ain al-Hilwi is better than going to Disneyland.
آخر واحد أنا شفته وياه ولع نار دغري. دغري شفته؟ المغارة مطرح ما بنطوخ نعمل رمائي.
This is my best friend, Abu Yad. He's been in the PLO since he was 7. I've always wanted to tell a story about this place. And I've been filming here since I was a kid. Every summer, when my holiday's over, I can leave Ain al-Hilwi whenever I want. But for my friend, it's a different story.
هيا رحت سافرت ورجعت ولقيتني بعدني مثل ما أنا. أنزل عملية أفجر حالي يا زلمة. تعرف أنا بقول أغلب اللي كانوا يفجروا حاليا حالتهم زي حالتي. بقسم الثورة وقسم فلسطين بس إنه شو ينهوا حياتهم. قص أختك عين حلوة.
It's been really well received. I mean, people just, we get these fan letters from Brazil and Japan, and people just write, "Oh, your granddad, he's the greatest. He's the greatest." And can you send this thing? They send bracelets. Can you give this to Abu Yad wherever he is? It's really nice. I mean, people, I think it somehow resonated with them, and it was. I mean, everyone has a grandfather, and everyone has a childhood friend, and so it's not like we're dealing with abstract elements. It's just the setting is different, and for me it wasn't. I always tried not to be political about it, although I insisted on being honest about my experience. So like when I talk about the trip to Israel, and when I talk about just how in fact, a lot of the stuff that you saw, the stuff that's filmed on High 8 was filmed in my first year here.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, that's the trip that I did in the first year.
This is where our cameras went.
So some people got, obviously, because in Berlin, for example, it became a bit political, and they were like, "Why aren't you talking about the Holocaust? And why aren't you telling the?" I said, this is about my family. It's not Berlin. Last year, where it got a Silver Bear, and the actor, who's not an actor, also won a prize. And then they played it in Copenhagen the documentary festival in the competition.
Yes.
So the programmer there said, "Well, it's documentary."
Okay.
And in Berlin, they were like, "No, it's fiction." But he'd read this story about this gypsy family, and poor family in Sarajevo. The mother gets ill, and she can't. She can't have a treatment because she doesn't have insurance, And he went to see that family and decided to ask them if they'd be willing to revisit, reenact what had happened and how it had happened. And so it's a beautiful, poetic. It's different and mixed, and but it's done really well. We've sold it to France. It came out in the theaters, and it's coming out in the theaters here and in Belgium and in Germany. U.S. television bought it. In fact, next week we launch a crowdfund campaign to try and, because the film has a week run in New York, but to qualify for the Oscars, that's not to say to get nominated, but just to become eligible for the Oscars, you need to have a week in New York and a week in LA. So we're crowdfunding for a theatrical run in LA. And then hopefully trying to get it out there for 2015. With fiction, each country has to nominate, so they put in a submission. But with documentary, Michael Moore changed the rules 5 or 6 years ago, which is basically you, as long as you can get a week here and a week there and get a review in one of the papers, then the film...
Good for Michael Moore.
Yeah, well, I felt I had to move away from a tendency that you see in a lot of these films, Palestinian documentaries, whatever, where you always have the old music, the traditional dramatic stuff going, and the victimized voiceover, and the burning olive trees. And I mean, there's a certain cliche that's been that you always see, and it seems to feed into a certain comfort zone of a representation of something that we always, you know, we have it, we know it from the media, we can just sap to the next thing because we know it, it's comfort. It's like the stone throwing boys and the tanks and the occupier and the occupied. It's a discourse that we are very familiar with, and so there's no, you know, and I really felt like I just didn't want to have anything to do with that, and didn't want to, and also it's not part of, again, in being true to the, it's not part of my experience, because I never, because my experience as a Palestinian is that of refugees in Lebanon and Denmark, and you know, so.
How long did it take to edit then first?
About a year and a half.
A year and a half, okay, then
Something like that, yeah. I mean, I was working with a genius editor. I don't say that about many people, but he's quite exceptional, and he's now, you know, edited For Those in Peril, the Paul Wright film, the Scottish film that was in Cannes this year, and the Concerning Violence, which opens in Berlin. Now, I mean, he's on to do lots of. He's really exceptional, and I knew Mike from film school. He was a year below me, and because he's Danish and I'm Danish, technically, we seem to click, and we have similar tastes, and we talk about, you know, things that the same things that excited us, you know. And so when I was a year after film school, still trying to figure out what to do with all this material, Mike had just graduated. And I saw some of his stuff. He cut a documentary and a grad film, which went on to win a BAFTA, which is again Paul Wright, who he worked with, and they shoot with tons of material and tons of stuff. And he seemed to have a very good kind of grasp of you know, different formats, different material. He has a good taste. He's good on story, but also he's a very good. He's like an overall editor. He understands music and sound, and of course you need to have a sense of trust, you know. Like there was a point in the film where I wanted to have my auntie in the film, because I cannot make a film in the camp without my auntie. It's not right. You see her a little bit in the film moments, and she sings in the wedding and that sort of. But in the end, you have to just. You know, you can't have this attachment. You just have to see them as characters in a story that you're trying to tell, and she just does not work. You know, she does not. There's no shifts in her character. There's no, and so I had to just brutally kind of trust Mike on this and just be like, okay, let's just try and get her out and see how that works, and it worked. I mean, it took a while because I had to translate everything for him. Obviously, he doesn't speak Arabic, so it was the first 4 or 5 months was just going through everything, log it, translate it, just so we had an overall idea of what we had. And at this stage, we still weren't. I mean, I had a feeling that this could be like a long, kind of 3-4 hour epic thing, and I didn't care if no one wanted to watch it, I'll watch it. You know, that's the attitude I had. And Mike was like, I'm not even sure if there's a short film here. so it was sort of, but then, you know, we reached a stage after about a year where we had like, I think it was like a 4 or 5 hour version, which had no archive footage. It was just the kind of the latest stuff that I'd cut, that I'd filmed that last summer. And that's when I went away and wrote, you know, so I was like, okay, we know we have this stuff, so I'm gonna write something about Dubai, and I'm gonna write something about, and so we would just sit in the, like he would sit on his editing machine, and I'm sitting at 2 tables, and I'd be using the thing on the Mac. There's a thing where you can record audio, really crap sound comes out, but you know, I'd be like testing the VO and sending it over to Mike immediately. So I'll record it and send it over, and then he'll try and put it together and be like, this is working, or this is not working, try this. And then, so it was like that, you know. You know, I always had this thing that, you know, anything I do, I have to try and get it into Cannes, you know, obviously, because that's the, and we try, you know, we sent it into Directors Fortnight and Critics Week, and it was sort of a rough cut. And of course they said no. And then we had a couple more months to work on it, and we were all feeling like this is it. This is, you know, it's about the right length. And I'd kind of convinced myself that it was 93 minutes. I was like, Lane is 93, so that's right. That's about right. I had all these crazy. But you know, it did feel like the right length, and the pace and the rhythm and everything. You know, that was a really big premiere for us. We didn't have a sales agent at the time, so we couldn't really use that as good as we could. But what happened in Toronto was that we got a really good variety review. Berlin came and saw it there and took it for the European premiere. And we just started to really, I mean, and PBS actually,
of course, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
they bought it there. So that was sort of a really, and my producer had never been to a film festival, let alone a short film festival before. I'd only done a few short film festivals, so for us it was just like being in this, I mean, Toronto is massive.
And it's such a major festival.
Yeah, it's the biggest market in North America, and it's, I mean, they have so many, you know, we were just at TIFF Docs, but they have the Canadian strand and the short films and the world cinema and the, you know, this.
Yes.
It was always an intuition that it had to be narrated, because I felt like there was no way I could do justice to the characters, because I wasn't just an outsider, I was also an insider, and I had a history with these people. You know, I knew Saeed from when I was a little kid till and then when I was 15, and then I knew him when I was in my 20s, and I knew him now. You know, so, and I felt like to show him as he is now, and even if I was to move back in time, how would I do that, technically speaking? How do you allow yourself the freedom to move in time? Yeah, a lot of it is intuition, really. You have to, I mean, I think filmmaking, you know, it's 10 years since I graduated here, and you learn a lot, but the one thing that you really learn, and if the more you pick up on, is how, when you trust and follow your own intuition, because that's really what's gonna give you the results you're wishing for in the end. It's not knowing all the technical stuff or knowing all the watching. I mean, I've watched films since I was a kid, you know, just been watching films all my life. But it's not. It's something else. I always say that if you can turn off the image and still follow it, it's really a bad documentary.
Thank you very much.